Hi, my name is Sanga Lindsay. I'm a landscape architect from Vancouver, British Columbia. Today we're down under, in New Zealand in fact, and we're going to talk today about sustainable gardens. The technical term for it is permaculture. So let's take a look inside and see what the key tips are for creating a self-sustainable garden. Design point of view, a permaculture, a sustainable garden, isn't actually a particular style. This one here is more informal. Some people may think it's too informal, but I always maintain that a sustainable garden isn't beholden to any particular style. It could have been a formal English garden look. It's the things that you do in your garden, the way you manage your garden, the elements you pick, and how you use them in your garden, which makes a permaculture garden successful. So, let's take a look. Up on top here is a couple of honeybee hives. And these honeybees are very important for pollinating. For example, the grapes have just come out flowering, the grapes that are in the trellis. And they'll also go around through the mini orchard of this garden pollinating, and it's been a proven fact that bees added to such an environment actually increase fruit production. And here's something a little more unique to us, New Zealand, and this is a kiwi vine. And in Vancouver we do have hardy kiwis, and in fact I have them in my own backyard, which I just started planting and going to see if they fruit next year. And as you can see, they've already started fruiting as well as concurrently blooming. So hence the reason why this whole great kiwi arbor system is located right next to the beehives on top of the trellis system. Now here's an interesting little element to the garden. It pertains to aquaculture. It's another way of adding another level of diversity to the edible garden. Water systems are able to achieve greater protein production per square meter than the same area of land-based systems. For example, the taro here, although we use it for ornamentals, down here is used as a tuber like a potato. So what happens here is water, and I'll just show where it comes in. When it does rain, filters down this little gateway, comes into this water pool, and here's watercress actually growing here, some reeds here, and later on in the season they'll also be growing water plants that also produce tubers. So an interesting little concept that not only can you create a neat water feature, but you can also create habitat, because this is the #1 attractant for wildlife like birds. Plus you could actually grow food in this area. And if you actually wanted to turn this into a bit of a rain garden, that would be another level where eventually you could percolate some of this groundwater back into the aquifer system. So, very interesting little concept that could be easily incorporated into any garden. Here's another example, although not the prettiest I must admit, but with a little bit of imagination you can create a much more attractive barrels, and in fact I'll be demonstrating that in my edible garden this month, or in this coming season I should say. It's called creating liquid manure. And here's an example of a little raised vegetable bed. Basically by raising it you create a layer of highly enriched soil, which makes your vegetable production more efficient, more intensive. And again, as I said in my last video, with the kitchen gardens you can adapt a raised bed to any size scale. You just don't have to have a monolithic area. Another important principle of sustainable gardens is the use of recycling materials. And in this case, very simple, we're all very familiar with it. This is a very old-fashioned sort of method of composting. And basically you take your green matter from your garden, your clippings and so forth, and you create alternating layers of 6 inches of your green waste, your clippings, and another 6 inches of dry matter like straw and or dirt. And then eventually in about 9 months to a year you will have a nice rich compost that can be returned back to your vegetable garden. This is a typical example of a closed system where it's waste in, which then produces something that's beneficial and cycles back into the garden. Here's another way of creating compost, and it's the use of worms, the red wigglers in particular. I have them actually inside in my own office in a little more fancier system, but in essence this is just an old bathtub, and I guess in New Zealand they can do it because the weather is much milder. And this is where you throw all your vegetable matter in, and as you can see there's things like eggs, and I'll just quickly lift it up because the red wigglers do not like sunlight. And there they are, and they are working their way around all the old vegetable matter like crazy. And they are highly ferocious eaters, highly productive eaters, and they also create an effluent, which this bathtub I think has a drain on it, but can create a worm tea, which is similar to the herb tea. That's really rich in nutrients that you can also dilute and pour back onto your vegetable garden as well. And here's a bit more of a whimsical way of recycling and reducing waste. This little couch, which also serves as a bit of a sitting area, and appropriately so on the arm is an old remote control for all of us couch potatoes. But basically using materials, old concrete, and using materials here, you can see bottles and remotes and glasses and spoons to create a bit of an artwork too. So it's really a matter of using your imagination when it comes to reusing materials. Very simple little tip for your vegetable gardens, which I'll be doing early this spring, is the use of recycling your old plastic containers. Right now you can barely see them, but right now is being germinated, I believe, some beans. And by creating a plastic dome, in essence, you're creating that area as a microclimate, warming up the soil, protecting the seedlings from frost. Very simple, very easy, but a good way to get a jump on your vegetable growing season. So here's another important concept of permaculture, and that is called stacking. And stacking allows the garden space to be used effectively, more effectively, because different plant species occupy different heights above the ground and they have different rooting depths. Because each species has different light, moisture, space, and nutrient needs. Because we understand the requirements of these plants, resources can be used more efficient, and things like weed and soil erosion can be reduced. So what I'm talking about here is the fact that we've got an overhead canopy here. It's an apple tree actually. This is a bottom layer of planting. This is all wildflowers. So this is an example of your edible plant. This is an example of wildflowers for wildlife habitat. It doesn't matter whether your permaculture garden is purely edible or purely functional from a wildlife point of view. It's about, again, the cycling of everything in the garden has a benefit to something. And here's a final example of, again, stacking, or even the walls. As you may recall, using garden walls are a great way to create microclimates, warming up plants such as the espaliered apple, creating fruit that ripens faster, and also sheltering plants from harsh winds, frosts. And again, it's underplanted with another plant. This one is a wild attractant plant. So again, the stacking principle, where we try to use every square inch of soil from the top layer all the way down to the bottom. So I hope you've learned something about how to create a sustainable garden. Number one, it isn't as fixed to any certain design style. It's about principles. It's about making the correct choices, smart choices. It's about creating gardens that provide food for ourselves as well as for the ecology. It's also about creating closed systems, or systems that cycle. For example, as we saw over in the far corner, the whole idea of composting, where we grow food, we harvest the vegetation, and then we return it into a compost system, which in turn turns into a rich fertilizer which we return back to the soil to start the cycle all over again. So it's basically reducing our energy consumption, reducing waste, and creating a closed system. My name is Sangha Lindsay. I'm a landscape architect, and if you'd like to know any more information on sustainable gardens or garden design in general, visit me at my website www.sanghadesigns.com.